snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so I am here today to do a cover chat, and the cover chat that I'm going to be doing is one that was very highly requested for ages by so many of you guys, so I'm finally doing it, and that is for Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, or The Final Empire if you're in the UK, the first one in his Mistborn series. So this series is a fantastic series. As you guys can see, I have it next to me and I really love it. Sanderson is amazing, but this series definitely solidified my love for him. Before reading this, all I had read was Elantris by him, and I already really enjoyed that, but this series just brought that to a new high and a new love of Sanderson, and from there I went on to read everything else by him. So if you want a good place to start with Sanderson, I would definitely say Mistborn is that place. What is it about? Basically, it's the story of a young girl called Vin and a man called Kelsia, and they meet each other in rather unlikely circumstances. Vin is a street rat. Basically, she runs around the streets doing odd jobs and trying to stay out of trouble and being a thief, very stereotypical. But then one day she comes across Kelsia and they meet each other, and Kelsia is forming a rebellion, and he kind of gets her involved with that because it turns out she may have some magical powers. In this world, there is a thing called allomancy, and allomancy is basically the magic of this world. You can swallow a vial of liquid metals, and depending on what metals you swallow and how much of the ability you have, you will either be a misting, which means you can use one of the metals, or a Mistborn, which means you can use all of the metals. So obviously a Mistborn is very powerful, but mistings also have their own abilities and they can be very powerful too. Each metal basically can do its own things. For example, we have iron, which pulls on nearby metals, we have steel, which pushes on metals, tin, which enhances your senses, pewter, which enhances your physical abilities, and so on and so on. There's a lot of different metals and you discover more over the course. And the story basically goes on from when they meet each other and continue to plot the rebellion and what happens with all of that. It's a fantastically written story. I gave all of them a 5 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend the series, but let's get into the different covers. So the first cover that I'm going to talk about is, I believe, the original cover. I don't know who illustrated this one, but I think it's really beautiful. And this one came out in 2006. It was published by Tor, and it's a hardback book with 541 pages. This cover is really interesting. I love the colour scheme that we have going on here, the fact that we've got blues, we've got purples, we've got pinks. They're all really nicely combined into this image. We have Vin, I'm assuming, jumping in a very dynamic pose. We're actually kind of looking up at her feet as she's jumping down as though she's above us. A really good technique to use. We've also got her mist cloak kind of flowing and billowing all around her, and that is incredibly cool. There's a lot of swirls going on that gives it more dynamism, makes it more action-packed, and instantly is a composition which we're interested in. It draws our eye into the middle looking at Vin, which is great. We've also got this very creepy face down in the corner. I'm guessing maybe that is a reference to the Lord Ruler, but I'm not entirely sure. And generally we've got these clouds and things going on in the background too, so it's a really interesting mix of things going on. There's a lot of vibrancy to it, and I think that for a first edition it's actually really interesting, and I do like this one a lot. The writing is obviously been personalised and created for the series. It's got a very interesting sort of medieval M, but then the rest of the lettering is slightly on the calligraphic side of things, which is quite interesting. We've got the title, which does actually have serifs on it to make it quite calligraphic, but then we have Brandon Sanderson's name along the bottom in the same colour, sort of a pastely salmony pink, and this one doesn't have serif, so it's sans serif, and it looks very bold. I think that the colours work really well. I think they definitely do pop out from the actual illustration behind, which is good, and generally I just really like this cover, and I would definitely collect them in these editions, but obviously they're not published like that in the UK. So would I buy this book? I definitely would. I think it's really interesting. I really like it, and I just love the colour scheme. I think that's the one thing that draws me in the most, is the colour scheme. But overall I think the image is very dynamic, and the type and the image work really well together because of the constant and consistent use of colour. Moving on then to the UK editions, which I'm just going to show you guys the front and the back, because it's actually illustrated around the sides as well, but I will put up a picture so you guys can see it more clearly. This is obviously the edition that I own because it is the most commonly viewed one in the UK. I don't know if we've got lots of other editions over here of the Mistborn. I'm pretty sure it's just this one. And it's paperback, as you guys can see, published in 2009 by Galanx. It has 647 pages, and the illustrator of this book is Sam Green, and I really love his stuff. He illustrates all of the UK Brandon Sanderson covers. As you guys can see, I've got a whole collection of ones that he's illustrated next to me, and I love his work. I love the fact that he uses pencil, and it's very, very clearly pencil, but then it's got manipulated image on top, such as the wispy blueness. That's really, really cool. I love the fact that we have silhouettes a lot. I think that's very exciting, and the architecture that he uses on the Final Empire is really cool because it's very visually fantasy and it looks very fantastical as opposed to a common town or anything like that. I like the fact that we've got this kind of ghost-like figure with the billowing robes, but they're actually very, very small, very, very tiny, and so that makes the buildings around them that much bigger and more gigantic, and that really gives this kind of claustrophobic looming feeling over the figure, which I love. The writing is actually really, really beautiful. I love the fact that we've got a very simple serif writing, but then we've added these swirly bits which are beautiful, and they are on, again, all of the UK editions of Sanderson's books, and I think they look fantastic. It really gives a sense of dynamism to this otherwise very static text, and it works incredibly well. I love the fact that we have a white cover with a very simple black and white image, and then one pop of colour, and that is again a theme that is continued with all of the Sam Green covers. It works really, really well. Would I buy this book? 100%. This is the edition I own all of the Sanderson books in, and I love them. And yeah, this is definitely one of my favourite covers of all time generally, and Sam Green is definitely one of my favourite illustrators. So I really, really love these covers, and I know that a lot of Americans who don't have this edition do tend to order from Book Depository to get it to them because I know they love it. So it's obviously a very popular edition worldwide. Then we have one which is illustrated by Sam Weber, and this one came out in 2011 and it was published by Tor. It has 2,307 pages because it is actually a combination of all three in the series. It's a bind up, and this one is the Kindle edition. I really, really like the cover of this one. Again, I think it's very interesting. I like the fact that we're using very, very neutral colours on this one. It's not trying to be pops of colour, it's trying to be very neutral, and that kind of is more reminiscent of the story, because in the story there's this constant stream of ash which falls from the sky and kind of pollutes a lot of stuff. And as the story goes on, that becomes more of a feature in the book. And so I think this is definitely referencing that with the grey tones, and I really, really like the fact that it is referencing it. Again, it's Vin who is pictured on the front cover. She is kind of swooping down, so it's a very similar idea to the original cover, where we have a very dynamic pose of a young girl swooping down, mist cloak billowing. I think the writing on this one could have been more exciting. It's very boring and it doesn't stand out quite as much as I would like because it's quite thin stem writing. If it was a little bit more bold, it would pop out a little bit more. Whilst I think that the Brandon Sanderson works well because it's on a much darker colour and it shows up more, the actual Mistborn lettering, and especially Trilogy and they don't stand out as much because they are on a lighter colour, and therefore it's closer, so it doesn't pop as easily into your eye. And if it had been a bit thicker on the writing, it would have popped out a bit more. So I do really like this one still. I think it's very interesting to look at, and I think it definitely references the story, but I think the writing could have just been a little bit more standout, and then it would have worked a lot better. So again, one I probably would buy if I saw it, but it could have a little bit of improvement as well. Then we have the mass market paperback, which is published by Tor in 2007, and this one has 647 pages as well. This one is one that I have a little bit of issue with because I don't love the depiction of Vin in this one. I just don't like the fact that she looks quite evil. The pose that she has on her face and the way that she's kind of looking in this lifelong stare kind of creeps me out a bit. I don't know, I don't really like this edition so much. I just think her pose is a little bit too static, and I much prefer seeing her in action as opposed to just standing there looking very ominous. I do, however, really like her mist cloak in this. I think the ethereal tones of blue and red that we're using and contrasting is really nice. Another thing that I'm not sure about working is the lettering. I think the lettering of Mistborn, the fact that it's kind of unique and it's got different extensions of the stems and things like that, is nice. I like the fact that the S comes down lower than the rest of the letters, but again, I'm not sure if this kind of gradient of pink and white really works that well, because it kind of loses a bit of it and it fades a little bit, it recedes a little bit into the background. The Brandon Sanderson at the bottom, I feel that's very, very chunky. I would have liked that to be a little bit condensed, just a little bit less thick, because it's very, very dominant, whereas the actual title is not quite as dominant. I like the image in some parts, I like the text in some parts, but overall it's not my favourite. So I don't think I would buy this one if I saw it, but I think there are some interesting elements to work with, and I feel like it could have been better if it was a little bit more developed. But it's alright as a cover, it's definitely got a nice feel to it, it definitely does hark back to the series generally, so I can still see why people pick this one up for sure. Then we have one which is published in Brazil, I believe, and this one was published in 2014 by Leia Brazil, hence why I believe it's published in Brazil. It's a Kindle edition and it's 758 pages. This one is very dynamic. It's got characters that we can see. We can see one who has a big axe and is on our main character, who is in the mist cloak. I can't actually tell if that is a boy or a girl, so I'm not sure if it's Kelsey or Vin. It could be either. But we've got these big axes and people wielding these big axes. They very much look like trolls to me, or dwarves kind of wielding these big axes, which doesn't appear in the story, so I'm not sure if that relates as well as I would have liked it to. I think the architecture that we see behind is really interesting, but again, it's not how I imagined it being, so maybe the Brazilian interpretation is a little bit different to mine. I do like the lettering on this one. I think the lettering is very interesting because, as you guys can see, the O of Mistborn is actually drawn to look kind of like one of the symbols for the metals. If you guys have ever read the book, you'll know that each metal has its own symbol, and you can see that in the Arx Arcanum at the end of the book, where all of them are listed. That definitely harks back to one of them, and I do like the calligraphy based design. It's very kind of Japanese in style, which I like a lot, so I do like the typography of Mistborn. I also think the fact that it's in yellow works really well because it's kind of a colour that is very similar to the sepia tones used in the background. I do think that the main Mistborn cloak character is really cool. I'm just a little bit unsure about the troll-like axe-wielding bad guys who are swooping in on him. They're the bit that I dislike the most out of this cover, so there are elements again which I really like and elements that I don't. I do like the little bar that we have at the bottom. I think things like that can really make a cover look quite stylish, which is really nice. So I think the lettering works very well. I would have perhaps liked a small layer behind that of slight opacity just to make it pop a little bit more, but generally I think this is a good cover. It definitely has some dynamism to it, which is fantastic, and for me it would definitely be a nicer cover if the axe wielding trolls were taken out of it. But I'd love to hear what you guys think, so let me know your own opinions. Then we have another cover. I'm not exactly sure where this one is from, but it is published by Hein Verlag, so I'm guessing somewhere like Germany, but maybe not. Correct me if you know exactly where that publishing house is. And this one was published in 2011. It's the Kindle edition and it's 896 pages. This cover is really, really interesting. I actually really like the colour scheme that they've gone with for this one. It's very, very neutral, but it has a kind of metallic rock-like feeling to it. It definitely feels like it could be a cave painting or something like that because of the simplicity of it. It's a very solid black outline of a silhouette, and we can see that someone is holding a sword above their heads. They've got a cloak on, but other than that we don't really get a lot of detail, and I like that because it leaves it more open to the reader's interpretation. I like the fact that we're working on this circular sort of spectrum, and I think it just works really, really well. This kind of grainy, rocky effect works as a texture that sort of fits in with this sort of world, fantasy wise, and just generally ash ridden world. It definitely has that feeling. I do really like the actual script and the writing as well. I think the N is really fantastically done. It's definitely got some swirls coming out of it and it looks like it's handcrafted or made with ink or something, so that's really nice. And the fact that it's embossed but it's got slight weathering around the edges of the letters is again something I really like when I'm looking at typography, and that definitely has it. Again, the fact that we have a yellowish tone that matches with the background is a really nice touch. I don't so much love the Brandon Sanderson because it's a bit too white. I would have liked it to be slightly more off-white than it is. Maybe the same colour or a bit lighter than that of the title. But overall, I think this one works really, really well as a cover, and it generally, those are very small complaints, and it definitely seems to work as a whole. So if I could read German or whatever language this is, I would definitely pick this one up because it very much intrigues me and it looks really, really cool to look at. Then we have the Portuguese cover. This one was published by Saidia de Emergencia. I'm not sure if that's exactly how you say it. It was published in 2014 and it's an ebook version and it has 822 pages. This one is another one where the use of colour is something I really adore. I love these colours that they've chosen, this kind of very deep pink and then the contrast of this sort of dark turquoise blue. They work really, really well together, this aquamarine and this sort of rosy pink. They just seem to really, really work. And then we've got the yellow of the windows as well. I really like the pose that we're getting. This time we have a static Vin who is standing on top of a building, but the fact that her cloak is billowing makes it still quite dynamic. She's got some rips in her cloak, so that definitely references a part of the story where she's always getting into trouble to escape from people or jumping over buildings. That's a big feature within the book, and this definitely references that, so I like that a lot. I also love the fact that we've got this whole depiction of a city spread out before her. It definitely feels very vast and very expansive, which is fantastic. The typography I think works well. It's a bright white, and actually I feel like this works quite nicely on this one because everything else is quite dark and that's a bright pop of colour, as opposed to where it doesn't quite fit because it's slightly too bright compared to the other colours. This one I feel like it does fit well because all of the colours are vibrant, just the main colours are dark, and this one is light. I like the fact that we have an extension of the stem through the N, of the join through the N. That's nice, and I think that works. Overall, this one's a really nice cover, and I think it works really well as an artwork and it works really well as a cover. Would I buy this one? Yes, I think so. I really do like it. I love the colour scheme and I love the position of the text. I think it works really well and is very balanced in comparison to the actual image. Then we have an Italian edition. This one is published by Fanucci. This one has 696 pages and it's a Kindle edition again. Again, this one focuses on circles. We have a silhouette in the middle and then we have circles around that silhouette. And we've got this sort of strange horse person charging in with a sword drawn. Not sure about that one, but I do like this sort of glowing eyes. It's quite spooky, it's quite ethereal. Again, I think the lettering, the actual form of the lettering of Mistborn is interesting. It's obviously been uniquely created and it definitely echoes some of the other covers that I've shown you guys. But I hate the colour scheme of this one. I think it's hideous and I don't think that the word Mistborn works at all. It really gets lost in the fact that we've got this glowing bar behind it. It recedes into that as opposed to popping out. Also, the lettering for Brandon Sanderson is way too bold. It just looks ugly. It looks like it was slapped on there, and I really don't like the fact that it's just been plonked on there. I feel like if it had been made smaller and it had been squeezed into the gap where there's just brown at the top, it would have worked a lot better. The fact that it's trying too hard to overlap and integrate the whole image means that the whole central bit of it has become very cluttered and it doesn't work for me, unfortunately. I think the fact that we've got the little symbols for the metals is really nice at the bottom. That works very well, but again, the colour scheme just is terrible. If there was less brown and yellow in this, it would work a lot better. If we had some other colours to mix it up a bit, it would work a lot better. If it was deeper and richer colours, it would work a lot better. This one feels like a book that's set in the desert to me and not much else. It doesn't really give that whole scope of fantastical, awesome stuff going on. It just gives this scope of a mysterious figure in a desert, which isn't really what the story is all about. So for me, I wouldn't buy this one. I don't really like it, but I am interested to hear if any of you guys do. Next, we have a Dutch book, and this one is a paperback. It's 640 pages long, and it's by Littinger Svitov. I really don't know how you say that, so I'm so sorry if I completely butchered that. This one is really interesting. We've got this black cloaked figure with a lot of wispy tendrils coming out of her and coming out of her cloak. I love that. It definitely harks to the story. We can see the impression of a city behind her, but we don't get too much of the detail. We're in this dark sort of cave or something. It's definitely a spooky feeling. We've got the red on the very sides where the title is, of like outlines of stuff, and then the green pearlescent kind of ethereal smoky tendrils in the centre, and that really backlights her and gives her the silhouette that we're seeing. So I really like this one, even though it's quite weird. I feel like the main character's piercing gaze is quite unsettling, and I actually quite like that. It gives more of a ghostly feeling to me, but I think it works and I think it looks cool, which is a major attraction to me from covers. I love cool covers. Brandon Sanderson's name works well, the placement works well because it's on the dark and it's light, so it stands out, it's clear, it's an easy font to read. The actual placement of the words for the title could have been slightly better. I feel like if they had been lowered a bit and a bit more of whatever she's standing on had been shown, we could have fitted that into the rock nicely and that would have worked. But overall, I think it's a good cover. I definitely think it's one that I would buy if it was in English, and it certainly intrigues me and makes me wonder, what is this story about? Because that's a major selling point for covers, and this one does that. And then we have the final cover that I'm going to talk to you guys about, and this is an Italian cover. This one is published by Fanucci as well. It's an ebook. It was published in 2012 and it has 608 pages. I hate this cover, not because I dislike the illustration, I just don't feel like it fits very well. When I imagine Vin, I in no way, shape or form imagine her in that sort of attire. I don't imagine Kelsier to look as that man does behind her. I just feel like this is way too classic fantasy in style as opposed to modern, epic, exciting magic, leaping from buildings, using these cool superpower type things. It doesn't have that vibe to me at all. It feels very much more like a toned down adventure story or a classic fantasy, and it's really not that sort of thing at all. So for me, this one doesn't work. The type on this one feels very old and a bit dated. So again, it just doesn't really give this modern, fresh, fun, vibrant vibe, which I want it to, because I know how the Mistborn story is, I know how dramatic it is, and this cover doesn't relay that to the audience. Overall, I just think this one, it has a nice illustration, it looks alright, but it's not fantastic at displaying the story, and it's an okay cover in its own right, but it doesn't work for this book, and it doesn't relay this story in the way that I imagine it, or I imagine a lot of other people imagine it. Would I buy this one? Probably not. It's not for me. I don't like the colour scheme. It's all a bit too wishy-washy and a bit light and pastel. I would like more vibrancy and more excitement. I would love to hear all of your thoughts on all of the covers I've mentioned in this video. If there are any that you particularly hate, if there are any that you particularly like, let me know. Do you agree or disagree with what I have said? I would absolutely love to hear. And if any of you guys have a different addition to the ones that I've mentioned, let me know, link me a picture, whatever you want to do, because I would love to see them. Thank you all for watching. Let me know if you've got any other ideas of cover chats that you would like to see in the future, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.